right now.
Imagine where we were at the beginning of this year. Our lives were going along fairly smoothly, perhaps. Perhaps we were experiencing some storms. But for the most part, our lives were doing okay. And then the pandemic affected the entire planet and turned our lives topsy-turvy. It is a perfect example of how change can come into our lives and flip everything in a moment. Our peaceful lives can be rocked by unexpected life events, can't they? A pandemic, the loss of a loved one, an unexpected diagnosis, a broken relationship, a job loss. We've all experienced some of these forms of upset at some point in our lives. Sometimes the peace that we enjoy can be upset by thoughts that start to disturb us. Maybe nothing out there, but something that's going on within us that is creating an inner turmoil and an inner storm. How do we handle these storms that face us? How do we reset ourselves to a place of calm as we make sense of it all? Well, the story of Jesus calming the waters offers us ideas for navigating these journeys. This is an interesting story that is found in 3 out of the 4 Gospels. They call them the Synoptic Gospels. They're Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And those 4 Gospels have many of the same stories contained in them. In each of the Gospels, the story changes just a little bit, the story of Jesus calming the water. We read from the book of Mark, which adds the most detail. So I'm going to read the story, and then we'll talk about what we might be able to learn from it. Mark 4, beginning at verse 35. On that day when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already swamped. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Jesus woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they, the disciples, were filled with great awe and said to each other, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Now, traditionally, we look at the story and we see it as a lesson in faith. We see it as a lesson to remind us that no matter how rocky our sea gets, if we place our faith in God, that we will be supported. And that's true. And we can go deeper and get even more information and lessons from this story. I remind you that we look at stories not just on the literal level, but also as metaphors about what's going on in our world outside of us, and metaphysically about the world inside of us. And so we look at these characters and we see what they might represent for us, both outside and in. So we see the disciples and Jesus journeying on a boat. Context, it had been a long day. He was very tired. Jesus falls asleep in the back of the ship, back of the boat. The wind pops up, gets crazy. The wind and waves start to threaten to swamp the boat. And the disciples go and wake Jesus up because they are scared. They realize that they can't cope by themselves. Jesus, who in the midst of all this crazy fear was sleeping, gets up, rebukes the wind, calms the sea, and reminds the disciples that they want to have faith. Well, what does that all mean for us? Well, the boat represents our life. It's basically how we sail along. The wind represents the thoughts that sometimes swirl within us, creating this vortex that we sometimes feel that we can't come out of. The sea represents that which is supporting us, that sometimes gets rocked. The disciples represent parts of us, aspects of us, all striving to work together to come into a wholeness of completion that is represented by Jesus. And what Jesus represents for us inside is the completion of all of our spiritual journey. It is the place where we love unconditionally all the time. The place where we are fully human and fully divine, where we are aware of our relationship with people, our relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with the energy of creation. And so Jesus represents what we are striving to attain. In the outer world, Jesus can represent anyone or anything that will help move us to a place of love, to the next most loving thought, most peaceful experience. Some people would say angels. Others would say ministers or teachers or best friends. Jesus represents the next most loving experience we can reach. And so we sail along in our everyday lives. And for the most part, the Jesus part of us is asleep at the back of the boat. And the less developed parts of us are actually kind of driving our ship. For the most part, when things are going well, we're not all that aware of our connection with God. We're not always all that loving. We're not always all that forgiving or patient or kind. But, we get through our day. And everything is more or less calm. Until a storm comes up and rocks our world. And what do we do when that happens? Let's look. The first is that we accept that there will be storms, that there is always a risk of storm in life. This story takes place on the Sea of Galilee, which is actually an inland lake. And there are storms frequently on this lake. What would have happened if the disciples pretended that there wasn't a storm? What would have happened if they wished it away? Or pretended that it wasn't happening? We see this with ourselves all the time. In fact, it's the very first step that they talk about in the movement through grief is denial. And so the very first thing that we need to recognize is that we will always resist storms, and they will always happen. It is a part of life to have the storm. There's this ebb and flow of the ocean that rises and falls, and sometimes is calm and sometimes is stormy. And so it is with our lives. And if we want to keep moving, we want to accept that that is a part of life, that change is a part of life. This can be hard at times. We want to hang on to our comfortable, smooth sea. Accepting that the change is real can be really scary. Sometimes we want to pretend that it doesn't exist. But when we pretend that a storm doesn't exist, it doesn't mean that it isn't happening. It simply makes us ineffective in how we respond to it. Whatever that change may be, illness, loss, pandemic, pretending it's not happening doesn't mean that it's going away. It simply means that we are ineffective in how we deal with it. So let us first accept that change is part of life, that storms will happen. Let us then move to see what the disciples did about that. They felt fear. Well, yeah. We all feel fear. We all feel discomfort, dis-ease in the face of change, in the face of not knowing how we're going to survive this challenge, whatever it may be. There is a great deal of fear and anxiety. And so the next step that we want to do is to recognize that that is going on for us. Now, in many spiritual thinking areas of our life, we may try to put that down. We may say, well, you know, I'm very spiritual, and I know that everything's going to work for the good, and so I'm going to pretend that this does not hurt. That doesn't work. Instead, we need to recognize that we are hurting. We want to honor the humanness of us that is not evolved enough to just go right into the spiritual hat of everything is great and I'm not experiencing human suffering. And so let us be kind to ourselves when we're in the storm and recognize that we will experience this amazing range of emotion when we're grieving, when we're scared, when we're uncertain. And when we recognize that, then we can do something about it. And what do? We go to our higher self. We go to our Jesus. We go to that which represents a place of peace. And we want to do that because we know that when we are in that place of peace, we can then become more functional. So we have these two very different responses to the storm that we see. We have the fear, the humanness of us, represented by the disciples who are afraid so much that their lives are going to end, and that they aren't going to be able to cope with this change that they're experiencing. And then we see the Jesus part of us that is waiting to be woken, calm, peaceful, resting, simply waiting to be awakened. And then when Jesus is awoken, he remains calm. He remains in this place of, I know what is supporting me. And he speaks to the wind. And he tells the wind to stop it. So when we are in that place of fear, we are called then also to go to the place within us where we can find calm. We think in terms of meditation. There are skills that we can learn so that we can remind ourselves how to become grounded. One of the techniques that works with children and that I find is really helpful for adults as well is to do a 5-finger exercise where you just go, peace, be still. 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 Whenever you're finding yourself in a place where you are stormy, where the winds are whirling around in your mind, I invite you to remember to go to the back of your mind and pull this little tool out. Look at your hand. It helps you focus. And repeat these, peace, be still. It is a way to calm yourself. And then once you are calm, then you can look at the situation and see it differently. You can be reminded of the truth, which is that every storm will pass. You can look at the truth that says, yes, this feels chaotic right now. It feels out of control. But I know that there is order amid the chaos. And when we can get to that point, we calm ourselves down, and that enables us to move again, rather than being paralyzed by our fear. Instead of feeling that we have to go around and round in circles in the vortex of whatever we're replaying in our mind. Whether it's a thought that you're experiencing, replaying something that somebody did, or what you might have done to someone, and wishing that you had done it differently. Whether it's a thought like that, a storm of that nature, or whether it's a thought or a storm that is more visible to the outside world. A relationship, a divorce, an illness. The same principles apply. We acknowledge that something is going on. We feel the feelings. And then we go within and we look for the calm that we can find within us. We awaken the next most loving, most peaceful thought that we can. And then from there, we take action so we can move again. The action might be simply, peace, be still. I don't need to think this anymore. I can choose to think something differently. Or it may be a real action, physical action. Now that we're in that place of calm, we may be ready to reach out and make a phone call to a friend or to a support group or to a teacher or a mentor or a counselor. When we are calm, then we can see what our next steps are. Then we can, like the disciples did afterwards, look at the wisdom of what we did by awakening our Jesus consciousness and seeing the power that we have within us to shift out of the storm. We go through it, we calm it. we move on. That is some of the power of this most beautiful story of Jesus calming the storm. The Jesus consciousness is in each of us. The disciples' consciousness is in each of us. When we are fretting and fearful, let us remember to awaken the wisdom within us. Let us use our power of word and our power over our thoughts, dominion over our thoughts, to remind ourselves of the truth. This will pass. It is not permanent. This feeling is not permanent. And I have the power to calm myself down. Storms will come. Storms will pass. As we sail on our sea, let us make a connection with Jesus' consciousness so strong that in the midst of the storm, we too can just rest, knowing that we are supported and that this will pass. Let's move to a time of quiet. On our screen, we put the words that we use for our meditation directly from this story. Peace, be still. And so we take a breath and we breathe in these thoughts. An old hymn says, "No storm can shake my inmost calm." So we reflect, what do we do? What do I do when a storm comes along in my life? Am I willing to experience and name the storm? Am I willing to be authentic in the middle of it and recognize my human emotions? Where am I feeling adrift, lost, afraid? In those areas of my life, I choose to wake. I choose to ask for help. I choose to learn how to calm myself, to shift out of the storm and into a place of greater peace, greater calm. remember that when I walk through a storm, I am always supported